Well now, let me tell ya, the night the storm rolled in, everything changed. The fence that split their families didn't just creak. It groaned, like it knew a secret was about to break loose. Colt stood on one side, Abby on the other, rain falling like tears on old grudges, hearts pounding louder than the thunder. It was the kind of moment where love and trouble danced in the same shadow, where whispers. The sun rose lazy over Willow Creek, spilling gold light on dusty barns and rows of green corn that whispered in the wind. Two farms sat across the narrow dirt road, the Bakers on one side, the Crawfords on the other. The land looked peaceful, but don't let the stillness fool you. There'd been bad blood between the families for years, thick as swamp mud and twice as sticky. Folks in town said the feud began over a stolen cow. Others swore it was about landlines. Nobody really knew anymore, but the hate had grown roots, deep and knotted. Colt Baker grew up hearing his daddy spit the name Crawford, like it was poison. "Don't you ever cross that road, boy," his daddy would say, tapping ash off his pipe. "A Crawford ain't nothing but trouble." Colt would nod, but deep inside, a small curious fire burned. He often watched their fields from the fence, saw the Crawford horses running, and wondered what made them so different. Across the road, Abby Crawford was told the same thing, only from the other porch. Her mama, hands covered in flour, would whisper, "Stay away from the Bakers, child. That family's cursed, through and through." Abby never asked why. But when she rode her mare near the boundary fence and caught a glimpse of Colt, strong shoulders, sun-browned skin, eyes that looked like they'd seen storms, her heart skipped like a stone across water. Neither of them knew it then, but the road between their farms was about to hold a secret. And secrets in Willow Creek, well, they don't stay buried for long. The wind carries them like whispers through the corn. Colt was supposed to be fixing the broken fence by the creek, but his hands kept slowing down. The morning air was thick with the smell of hay and honeysuckle, and somewhere across the road a horse neighed, a soft, sweet sound that made his chest tighten. He wiped sweat from his forehead, squinted through the sunlight, and there she was, Abby Crawford, sitting tall on her chestnut mare, braid falling over her shoulder like a line of gold. She wasn't supposed to be near this side. He wasn't supposed to be staring. But there they were, two souls caught in the hush between their families' shouts. Colt's heart beat like a hammer on wood. Abby turned her head slowly, like she felt his eyes. For a moment, just a flicker, they locked gazes. It wasn't long, but it was enough. Enough for her to give a small smile, the kind that said, "I see you." Enough for him to forget every warning his daddy ever gave. "Colt, boy, you better not be daydreaming over there." His father's voice snapped like a whip from the barn. Colt flinched, grabbed a loose plank, and forced himself to look away. Abby tugged her reins gently and rode off toward the Crawford fields. But even as she disappeared behind the corn, Colt could still feel the weight of that smile. That night, lying on his creaky bed with the moonlight slipping through the shutters, Colt replayed that moment over and over. The way her eyes softened, the way his heartbeat changed. He told himself it didn't mean nothing, but deep down he knew something had shifted. And across the road, Abby lay awake too, staring at the ceiling. She whispered his name once, quiet like a prayer she wasn't supposed to say. "Colt." Crawford barn caught fire 3 summers ago, and even though nobody could prove it, both families still carried that night like a stone in their chest. Folks said they saw a Baker truck near the woods. The Bakers swore the Crawfords started it themselves for insurance money. Truth or lie, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the blame stuck like burrs on a wool coat. It was the day of the Willow Creek Harvest Fair. The one day a year when both families had to share the same dusty town square without killing each other. The air smelled of roasted corn, fried dough, and wood smoke. Children ran between hay bales, laughter skipping through the air like pebbles across a creek. But under the laughter, there was a hum low, tense, like the earth was holding its breath. The Bakers set up their produce stand right beside the Crawfords, just like they did every year. Not by choice, but by county fair rules. 2 wagons, side by side, corn against corn, apples against apples, pride against pride. Colt helped unload baskets, sneaking glances toward the Crawford side. He spotted Abby arranging peaches in a neat row, her fingers gentle, her braids swaying down her back. She glanced up once and their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. Then she turned quickly, cheeks flushed like sunset. It might have stayed peaceful, if not for Mr. Crawford's tongue and Mr. Baker's temper. "You call these apples?" Crawford barked loud enough for half the fair to hear. "Looks like pig feed to me." Baker turned, knife still in his hand from cutting rope. "Better pig feed than the sour trash you're peddlin', Hank." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The fiddler stopped mid-song. A chicken squawked somewhere. "You burned my barn," Crawford shouted, face red as a beet. "You tried to steal my water." Baker shot back. Then it started. Not with fists, not yet, but with words sharp as barbed wire. Old accusations flew like crows startled from a field. Wives joined in, brothers too. A barrel tipped. Apples rolled across the dirt like scattered marbles. The sheriff rushed in, big belly bouncing, shouting for order, but the damage was done. The whole town saw the hatred raw and open, like a wound that never healed. And in the middle of it all, Colt and Abby stood frozen on opposite sides. Their eyes found each other through the shouting, and something passed between them. Fear, yes, but also defiance. Like 2 souls whispering, "This ain't the end." That night, Willow Creek held its breath. The fairgrounds emptied. The fiddles went quiet, but the echo of shouting hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Folks in town whispered about what they'd seen. "Did you see the way Hank Crawford pointed that finger?" Baker almost swung first. "Those 2 families are gonna set the valley on fire before harvest is done." Back at the Baker farm, the porch light burned late. Colt sat on the steps while his father paced the boards like a hound that smelled blood. "They embarrassed us," his father growled. "In front of the whole town. Called my apples pig feed." Pig feed. His hands shook as he jabbed the air. "From this day on, no more kindness. No more handshakes at market. We cut them off. Every deal. Every favor. If a Crawford's barn caught fire again, I'd stand there and warm my hands." Colt said nothing. He just stared at the dirt road stretching between the farms like a line drawn by an angry hand. His father stopped pacing, leaned down and locked eyes with him. "And you, boy, don't you ever look their way again. Not her. Not any of them. Do you understand?" Colt nodded slowly, but his heart tightened like a rope around a fence post. Across the road, the Crawford house was just as loud. Abby's father slammed his hat on the table. "That man humiliated me, humiliated this family. From tomorrow we take our produce to the North Road, bypass their wagons. We'll show them we don't need bakers for a thing." Her mama nodded sharply. "They've always thought they were better. Maybe it's time we reminded them who's been farming this land the longest." Abby sat silent, fingers curled around the edge of her chair. Her mind wasn't on her father's words. It was on Colt's face during the shouting. He hadn't joined in. He just looked at her like he was searching for something past all the noise. That night, both lay in their beds on opposite sides of the road, listening to the same crickets under the same moon. Colt tried to throw himself into work the next morning, but the fields felt different. The sun was the same, the corn rose straight as ever, but his mind wandered like a stray calf. He drove fence posts with steady hands, but every hammer strike echoed with his father's warning. Don't you ever look their way again. But he had looked, and he kept looking. When he rested by the fence line, sweat rolling down his neck, his eyes drifted across the dirt road. He half expected to see her riding by, braid swinging, smile shy. But the Crawford fields were quiet, too quiet. It made something ache in his chest he couldn't put into words. His younger brother Luke ran up with a bucket of nails. Pa says we're not sellin' to the Crawfords anymore, Luke said, puffing with importance. Says we'll starve before we trade with snakes. Colt forced a nod, but inside, something twisted. He didn't want to be a snake or a soldier. He just wanted to breathe. Across the road, Abby walked through the orchard, skirts brushing against the morning after the fair's uproar. The sky broke wide open, soft blue with sunlight spilling down like honey. The fields glistened from the night's dew, and everything looked peaceful, though everyone in Willow Creek knew better. Peace here was just a quiet before another shout. Colt had been sent down to the creek to check the water troughs. He walked slowly, boots sinking into the soft mud, his mind elsewhere. The sound of frogs croaking and the trickle of water mixed with his thoughts like a song he couldn't stop humming. He crouched down to tighten a loose plank, humming low, when he heard it, the sound of hooves on wet grass. He turned his head, and his breath caught. There she was, Abby, riding her chestnut mare along the far edge of the creek, her braid hanging down her back like a golden rope. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not this close, not in broad daylight. But maybe she had the same restless heart. Maybe she'd been drawn by something she couldn't name either. Their eyes met across the narrow water. It wasn't planned, but it felt like the world tilted for a second. The birds went quiet. The wind stilled. Hey! Colt mouthed silently, a small smile tugging at his lips. Abby's heart slammed against her ribs. She shouldn't answer, but her fingers loosened on the reins, and she mouthed back, "Hi!" Just then, a sharp voice cut through the air like a whip. Abigail! Her cousin Miriam stood at the edge of the orchard, eyes wide. "Pa's lookin' for you." Abby jerked her reins, panic flashing in her eyes. Colt ducked low by the trough, pretending to be fixing something, his heart hammering like a runaway horse. Abby turned her mare, riding away as fast as she dared, trying not to look back. But she did, just once. And that look said everything. Miriam ran toward the fence, suspicious, but by the time she got there, Colt had vanished behind the tall reeds. All she saw was the water, quiet and innocent. The sun dipped low, bleeding orange and red over Willow Creek, and both farms moved like busy beehives before night. But under all that movement, suspicion had started to grow, quiet, creeping, like weeds between fence posts. On the baker porch, Colt's father sat in his rocking chair, pipe smoke curling in the air. Luke, Colt's younger brother, came running up from the south fence, cheeks flushed. "Pa," he panted. "I seen one of the Crawfords ridin' close to the creek again this mornin'. Real close. Looked like Abby." His father's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" He tapped his pipe against the arm of the chair. "Those Crawfords think they can sniff around my land. They got another thing comin'." "What you gonna do?" Luke asked. "I'm gonna set a watch," his father said slowly, voice like gravel. "If a Crawford crosses that line at night, we'll know. And if I catch him—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the cold in his tone said enough. That same evening, over at the Crawford house, Abby's father was just as restless. Miriam had told him about spotting Abby near the creek, and though Abby insisted she was only riding by the orchard, the seed of doubt had been planted. "Hank," Abby's mother whispered, "maybe she's just curious. She's young. Curious leads to foolish," he snapped, "and foolish leads to trouble with bakers. I'm settin' a snare by the creek. If those bakers try any tricks, stealin' water, breakin' fences, I'll catch 'em in the act." So as the moon rose high in silver, two plans unfolded on opposite sides of the road. Colt's father posted Luke behind a stack of hay near the fence with strict orders. Keep watch. No sleepin'. No talkin'. You see a Crawford, you holler. And over on the Crawford side, Abby's father set up a hidden snare by the creek. A wire loop tucked low in the grass, meant to catch a foot or a boot. But here's the thing about traps. Sometimes they catch more than what they were set for. Because that very night, under the same moon, Colt had made up his mind. He was tired of fence lines and warnings. He slipped quietly from his room, boots in hand, heart pound. The night spread over Willow Creek like a dark quilt stitched with stars. Crickets sang steady, frogs croaked down by the creek, and a warm wind drifted through the corn rows, carrying the sweet smell of soil. The Crawford house was silent, except for the beating of one heart that refused to rest. Abby sat by her window, staring across the moonlit fields toward the fence line. She knew she shouldn't. Her father's snare lay somewhere out there in the dark. But the pull was stronger than the warnings, stronger than blood, stronger than fear. She pulled on her boots, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and tiptoed through the hallway like a ghost. Every board seemed to creak louder than usual, but no doors opened. When she reached the back door, she paused, listening. Her father's heavy snores rumbled from the parlor. Safe enough. She slipped outside, the night air cool against her skin. The grass whispered under her feet as she walked toward the creek. With every step, her breath grew shallower. Her heart pounded. Colt was halfway out his bedroom window when he heard it. A cry, sharp and breathless, cutting through the night like a whip. Then the bark of the hound. His stomach dropped like a stone tossed down a well. He didn't think. He just moved. Boots in hand, he jumped down from the window, landing soft in the dirt. The moon lit his path faintly, enough to show the outline of the fence and the dark stretch of creek. He could hear movement now, rustling grass, labored breathing. Someone was caught. Abby, he whispered under his breath, already knowing. He slipped through the shadows like he'd done 100 times as a boy, chasing stray calves. He kept low, moving fast but quiet. Ahead, near the trough, he saw her. Tangled in the snare, breath coming in quick bursts, eyes wide like a cornered deer. Colt? She whispered, shocked, her voice trembling like wind through corn stalks. Don't move, he hissed gently, dropping to his knees beside her. He pulled a small pocket knife from his belt, hands steady even though his heart was pounding like a runaway horse. The wire was wrapped tight around her boot, biting into the leather. She winced as he slid the blade under it. Hold still, he murmured. One quick twist. One sharp slice. The wire snapped loose with a quiet ping. She gasped as her leg came free. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other in the moonlight. Close enough to feel each other's breath. Close enough for words to stick in their throats. Then a voice split the night. Luke, what's going on out there? Colt's father's voice, rough and close. Go, Colt whispered urgently, grabbing Abby's hand and pulling her toward the tall reeds by the creek. They ducked low as footsteps crunched on gravel near the fence. Luke appeared first, lantern held high, scanning the field. The golden light passed just inches above their heads, flickering over the reeds but not settling. Abby's heart hammered against Colt's arm. His hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and firm, as if letting go would make her disappear. Luke frowned. Must have been a fox, he muttered, turning back toward the house. When the lantern light finally faded, Colt and Abby stayed crouched in the reeds, breathless, their faces close in the silver dark. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. You shouldn't have been caught, he whispered back, a hint of a grin cutting through the danger. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. No fences, no shouting, just two hearts beating wild in the night. The reeds swayed gently around them, whispering secrets to the creek. The lantern light had faded, the footsteps were gone, and the night returned to its quiet song, Crickets, frogs, wind through the corn. Colt and Abby stayed crouched in the shadows for a long moment, their breaths mingling in the cool air. Colt finally broke the silence, his voice low, like he was scared the night itself might overhear. "I thought I was dreamin' when I saw you here." Abby let out a shaky laugh. "If it's a dream, then I almost woke up with a broken ankle." She pulled her boot off and rubbed the red mark where the snare had gripped her. "My father said that. Said he'd catch any baker fool tryin' to steal from us." Colt shook his head slowly. "And mine set a watch to catch any Crawford sneakin' through. Seems like both of 'em caught the wrong folks." Their eyes met in the moonlight. No shouting. No warning voices. Just truth, soft and dangerous, sitting between them like a candle flame. "I don't even know why they hate each other anymore," Abby whispered. "It's just stories now. Stories they keep passin' down like bad recipes." Colt leaned back on his heels, staring up at the stars. "My pa says your folks burned his barn. Yours says we stole the water. But all I see is the same sky sittin' over both our roofs. Same dirt under our boots. Ain't that somethin'?" She smiled, slow and real. "Yeah, it is." They talked in whispers for a long while, about the fields, about the fair, about little things they'd noticed about each other from afar. She told him she loved riding near the creek because it felt like the world didn't have lines. He told her he'd always watched her braid swing when she rode past, though he never dared wave. At one point, their hands brushed in the grass. Neither pulled away. Her fingers slipped into his, shy but sure, like they'd done it before in some other life. A barn owl hooted in the distance. The moon climbed higher. Time seemed to slow, wrapping them in a quiet bubble where the feud didn't exist. Then Abby whispered the words neither of them had said out loud before. "I shouldn't be here." Colt squeezed her hand gently. "Yeah, me neither." But neither moved. And in that silence, under that watchful moon, something was set in motion. Something neither family. The nights that followed became their own kind of promise. Each time the moon rose over the creek, Colt found his way through the tall grass, and Abby slipped past the watchful eyes on her porch. They never planned the meetings, they just happened, like two moths drawn to the same lantern glow. The first night after the snare, they brought stories. Colt talked about how he used to climb the old pecan tree to watch the harvest dances from a distance, pretending he belonged to a world that didn't split down the middle. Abby confessed she'd once sneaked into the baker side of the fair just to taste the fried peach pies they were famous for. They laughed so hard that night they had to cover their mouths to keep from waking the world. The second night, they brought dreams. Colt told her how he wanted to build a small stable of his own someday. Nothing fancy, just a place where the horses can breathe easy and folks ain't fightin' all the time. Abby whispered about wanting to ride beyond the Crawford lands, to see what lay past the dusty road. Their words floated up like fireflies, bright and uncatchable. By the third night, they stopped bringing words. Sometimes they just sat shoulder to shoulder on the creek's flat rocks, feet dangling in the cool water, listening to the frogs and the wind. Colt would draw lazy shapes in the sand with a stick, and Abby would rest her chin on her knees, stealing glances when she thought he wasn't looking. One night, a storm threatened in the distance, dark clouds swallowing the stars. Abby showed up anyway, soaked at the edges of her dress. "I thought you might not come," Colt said, pulling her under the low branch where he'd hung a lantern. "I'd rather be out here in the rain than back there pretending," she replied, her voice trembling with something more than cold. He reached up, gently tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. For a moment, the whole world held its breath. The storm rolled and grumbled overhead, but beneath the trees, their silence was warm, electric. They didn't call it love. Not yet. But it was in the way their hands found each other without thinking. It was in the way their laughter lingered long after they parted. It was in the way the night itself seemed to bend around them, guarding their secret. And every time they slipped back to their separate worlds, their hearts carried a little more of the other's. Old Man Turner had lived at the edge of the Crawford and Baker lands longer than anyone could remember. His house leaned like it was tired of standing, and his porch creaked like it had secrets to tell. He didn't say much, but he watched. Folks said he could spot a fox in the henhouse before the hens even squawked. One humid evening, while most of the town drifted off to sleep, Turner sat on his porch with a kerosene lantern and his old hound, Duke. The moon was sharp that night, laying pale ribbons of light across the fields. That's when he noticed movement near the creek, a flicker of a lantern where no lantern should be. He narrowed his eyes. "Ain't no crawfish gatherin' down there this late," he muttered to Duke. The next night he saw it again. Two shadows slipping like whispers through the tall grass. One came from the Baker side, one from the Crawford orchard. They met by the creek like they'd done it 100 times before. Turner leaned forward, heart beating slow and steady, like a drum at a hanging. He didn't catch faces, but he saw enough to stir his suspicions deep. The morning after, Turner ambled into the Crawford feed store. "Strange things happenin' by the creek lately," he said loud enough for ears to perk. "Lantern lights, two figures where there shouldn't be." Abby, stacking jars behind the counter, froze for half a second before forcing herself to keep working. Her cousin Miriam laughed. "Probably kids foolin' around," she said. Turner didn't laugh. "Kids don't move like that. They move like they own the night." Later that day, he paid a visit to Colt's father too, dropping the same slow words like bait on a hook. By the time the sun set, both households had their guards up. Watchful eyes, stricter rules, locked back doors. That night, Colt crept toward the creek and saw the flicker of Turner's lantern far off, pacing like a wolf waiting for the right moment. Abby arrived breathless, eyes wide. "He's watchin'," she whispered. For the first time, their secret place didn't feel like a sanctuary. Felt like a trap. The night was thick with summer heat and the scent of damp earth. A sliver of moon hung low, like it too was holding its breath. Colt reached the creek first, crouching near the flat rocks. His heart beat fast, not with excitement this time, but with unease. Turner's lantern hadn't appeared in 2 nights, and that silence felt heavier than his watching ever did. Abby arrived moments later, slipping through the orchard fence. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "Pa's been pacing the porch all evening. He never does that." Colt nodded. "My pa's been keeping Luke up later too. Said something about catchin' rats in the field." They didn't have time to untangle their fears because, suddenly, a crack echoed from the trees. Not the sound of a branch in the very next morning, the world changed. On the Baker farm, Colt woke to find Luke sitting by the door with a shotgun across his knees. His father stood near the porch steps, coffee in hand, scanning the fields like a hawk that had finally spotted prey. "Pa," Colt asked, voice thick with sleep. "From now on, nobody leaves this farm after dark," his father said flatly. "Turner's got us wise. There's something sneakin' around these lands, and I won't have no Baker blood mixed up in Crawford foolishness." Luke grinned like it was some grand adventure. Colt felt the walls close in. On the other side of the dusty road, Abby's house grew colder too. Her father nailed a heavy plank across the back door, muttering about unwelcome wanderers and girls losing their heads. Miriam followed Abby everywhere, pretending it was sisterly concern, but her eyes were sharp. "Where are you going?" she'd ask if Abby stepped outside after supper. "Just for air," Abby would answer. "Pa says air's better on the porch," Miriam would reply with a smirk. Days passed, then weeks. The creek grew lonely. The fireflies danced without witnesses. The old pecan tree stood in silence, remembering what they could not repeat. Colt tried to keep busy, mending fences, checking the barns, but every sunset made his chest ache. He'd catch himself staring at the Crawford orchard from a distance, hoping to see a figure in a white dress. But there was only wind. Abby spent her nights by her window, watching the moon rise over the fields. Some nights, she'd press her forehead against the cool glass, whispering his name like a prayer. Other nights, she'd clench her fists and tell herself to forget. But forgetting someone who feels like home is a battle you can't win. Both of them lived in the same rhythm, work by day, ache by night. Their love didn't fade. It deepened in the silence, growing roots under the soil where no eyes could see. And somewhere out there, the creek waited patiently, like a secret that refused to die. The summer dragged on, slow and heavy like honey on a spoon. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the feud between the Bakers and Crawfords hardened like old clay. Neither side bent, neither side blinked. Colt tried to hold the ache down, bury it under chores and duty. But some nights, when everyone slept and the stars were sharp and cold, he'd wander close enough to hear the creek's murmur. He never crossed. He never called. He just listened, as if the water might carry her voice. Abby did the same from her side. Her father kept her close. Miriam's eyes followed her like a shadow. But every time the moon rose, her heart wandered where her feet could not. She'd lean against the orchard fence, eyes straining toward the fields beyond, whispering to the wind. One night, a storm came. Not a light summer shower, but a rolling, roaring tempest that split the sky wide. Rain fell in sheets, thunder shook the trees, and lightning lit the creek like a silver blade. Abby stood at her window, watching the storm rage, and something inside her broke free. She opened the door and ran barefoot into the rain, dress plastered to her skin, hair whipping wild. Across the field, Colt did the same, as if they'd heard the same silent call. They met at the creek like they'd done so many nights before, but this time the world was not quiet. The creek had swollen, the current fast and angry. They stood on opposite banks, soaked and shaking, lanterns left behind. "Colt!" Abby cried through the wind. "Abby, you shouldn't be here," he shouted back. For a heartbeat, it didn't matter. The feud didn't matter. The watching eyes, the old grudges, the traps. None of it mattered. Only them. Colt stepped forward, water rising to his knees. Abby did the same from her side. The storm roared louder. And then voices, shouts from both farms. Lanterns swinging through the night. Fathers, brothers, cousins, all charging toward the creek. Colt froze. Abby did too. The moment stretched like a held breath. Their eyes locked across the water. Not with fear this time, but with something steady, fierce, and true. "I'll find you," Colt said. "I'll wait," Abby whispered. The hands of their families pulled them back. Rough grips, sharp commands, angry words swallowed by thunder. The storm carried them home in opposite directions, but something deeper stayed between them. When the rain cleared by morning, the creek was calm again. The footprints were gone, but the memory of that night settled into the soil like a seed waiting for spring. Folks kept feuding. Seasons turned. But every now and then, under a bright moon, some say they saw two shadows by the creek. Close, quiet, and unbroken. And if you listened real close, past the frogs and the wind, you could still hear it. Two hearts calling through the night.